Something shifted this week in the Ronnie Do case, and if you have been following this story from the beginning, you already feel it in your chest. For 17 months, the family of Ronnie Do has been standing in the middle of a storm with no shelter, waiting for somebody in a uniform to say the words out loud. And now, finally, quietly, without a press conference and without a headline banner, the detectives working out of the Arlington area have started to move. They have started to move in a way that people close to this case have not seen them move before. There are new interviews being scheduled. There are old interviews being reopened. There are names being pulled back into rooms that most of us thought had already been closed. And the woman whose name has been circling the center of this entire tragedy for a year and a half, Kashawn Rock, has suddenly, conveniently, dramatically announced that she will be going dark. No live streams. No cameras. No public appearances. 30 full days of silence. And she wants you to believe that this is because her camera broke. Do you hear me? A camera. That is the story she is asking the internet to swallow, while detectives are, according to reporting from TMZ and multiple outlets, actively developing new information in a homicide investigation that centers on the father of her child. Stay with me, because tonight I am going to walk you through everything that has changed in the last 72 hours, everything the police have hinted at without saying, everything Quell has admitted and then unadmitted, and the one thing about Kashawn Rock's sudden vanishing act that nobody else is willing to say out loud. This is not a cold case anymore. This is a case that is finally, mercifully, terrifyingly catching fire. Justice for Ronnie Do. Let us begin. Before we go a single step further, I want you to understand the weight of what we are looking at. In February of the year Ronnie Do lost his life, this was not a random act. This was not a robbery gone wrong. This was not a stray bullet in the middle of a crowd. This was a targeted hit. Someone made a phone call. Someone sent a team. Someone identified a location. And that location was in front of a family member's home, which means whoever set this in motion knew exactly where Ronnie Do would be, exactly when he would be there, and exactly how vulnerable he would be in that moment. You do not stumble into an ambush like that. You are led into it. And from the very first hours after Ronnie Do was taken from this world, one name kept surfacing in every corner of every conversation. Not because a blogger dropped it. Not because a rumor took off. Because the timeline itself was screaming it. Ronnie Do had recently filed for custody. Ronnie Do had recently filed for a DNA test to confirm that Kashawn Jr., the little boy at the center of all of this, was in fact his son. Ronnie Do was fighting on paper in a courtroom with lawyers and signatures and dates and receipts to be present in that child's life. And within days of that fight becoming official, Ronnie Do was gone. That is not a coincidence. That is a sentence with a subject and a verb and an object. And law enforcement, from what we are now learning, appears to have finally arrived at the same reading of that sentence that the community arrived at on day one. Now, before we go deeper, hit that subscribe button if you are new here, because tonight I am not holding anything back. This is one of those videos where every single detail matters, and I need you locked in with me for every second of it. Let me walk you through what the detectives are actually doing right now, because this is the part of the story that is not being framed clearly anywhere else. According to reporting confirmed by TMZ directly with the Arlington Police Department, this case has never been closed. It has been categorized as a cold case in the public imagination, but internally, inside the department, this investigation has been open, active, and continuously staffed for 17 consecutive months. Read that sentence again. 17 months. Somebody has been sitting in a room every week, staring at a whiteboard with Ronnie Do's name on it. Somebody has been making phone calls. Somebody has been requesting records. Somebody has been sitting across from witnesses who did not want to be sitting across from anybody. And the department has now confirmed, on the record, that there have been developments. Plural. Not one. Developments. They cannot speak on the specifics, and any real investigator will tell you why. You do not tip your hand when you are closing the net. You do not announce your next move when the people you are about to move on are still within reach of a passport. You keep it silent. You keep it internal. You keep it airtight. And then, one morning, without warning, the doors get knocked on. That is where we are in this case right now. That is the moment we are living in. And if you understand that, you understand why Kashawn Rock is behaving the way she is behaving. Let us talk about Kashawn Rock. Let us talk about the pattern. Let us talk about the timeline of her recent decisions, because when you lay them out end to end, they stop looking like the choices of a woman who has nothing to hide and start looking like the choices of a woman who is watching the water rise. First, there was the statement that she was going to leave the country. Not a vacation. Not a getaway. Leave. Full stop. That was the word she used, and the internet caught it, and she felt the heat of that internet catching it, and she walked it back. Then, there was the boxing match. A boxing match she had signed on for, promoted, hyped, and profited from the buildup of. And suddenly, without warning, there were whispers that Kashawn Rock was trying to pull out. Why? Why would you walk away from a payday, from a spotlight, from a moment you engineered for yourself, unless something bigger was pulling you in a different direction? Then, there is the traffic court. The suspended license. The legal paperwork already sitting on a judge's desk with her name on it. And now, this week, the announcement that she will not be going live for 30 days. 30 days. And the reason she gave? Her camera. Her camera dropped. Her camera is broken. She needs to send it in for repairs. But in the same breath, on the same stream, with the same broken camera, she casually mentioned that she was going to buy a new one anyway. So which is it? Is the camera broken and unusable, or is a new one on the way tomorrow? Because if a new camera is on the way, there is no 30-day silence. There is no reset. There is no reason for the woman who has built an entire brand on being loud, being present, being on camera every single day, to suddenly retreat into a bunker for a full month. Unless the retreat is not about the camera at all. Unless the retreat is about buying time. Buying distance. Buying quiet while she figures out what her next move is going to be. And here is where I need you to listen very carefully, because this is the part of the story that the algorithms want to bury. Kashawn Rock, at the time of Ronnie Do's passing, had the single largest personal motive of any human being on the planet for Ronnie Do to no longer be walking this earth. That is not an accusation. That is a fact about incentives. When somebody files for custody of your child, your world changes overnight. When somebody files for a DNA test that could confirm parentage in a court of law, your control over that child's life is no longer absolute. When that person is publicly, loudly, unambiguously stating that they intend to be present, to be involved, to be a father, and they are willing to fight through the family court system to make that happen, you are staring at a future you did not sign up for. And within days of Ronnie Do formalizing that fight, Ronnie Do was ambushed in front of a family member's home. If the people in the streets who may have had issues with Ronnie Do were the ones behind this, they would not have waited. They would not have paused. They would not have sat around for months and then, coincidentally, moved on the exact same week that a custody filing hit a courthouse. The timeline is the fingerprint. The timeline is the confession the killer never signed. And detectives, who are trained specifically to read timelines like this, are now reportedly zeroing in on precisely the relationships and affiliations that circle back to that moment. Do not swipe away yet, because I have not even gotten to Quell. Quell is the name that this entire story could have been about, and yet, watch what is happening in real time. Every major blog covering this case, every reposter, every commentator, every outlet, is either sharing each other's information or citing TMZ's confirmation from the detectives themselves. Nobody is sharing Quell. Nobody is centering Quell. And there is a reason for that, and the reason is that Quell has become an unreliable narrator of his own alleged involvement. Let me back up. Quell was, at one point, part of the same social circle that included both Kashawn Rock and Ronnie Do. That is documented. That is not in dispute. In the aftermath of Ronnie Do's passing, Quell went online, and Quell started taking credit. Not in vague terms. Not with plausible deniability. He was, according to what people saw and screen-recorded and passed around, publicly claiming responsibility. Bragging. Signaling. Playing the part. And then, predictably, inevitably, the police showed up at his door. And the moment the police showed up at his door, Quell's story changed. It was a joke. It was trolling. It was internet nonsense. He had nothing to do with it. He was never there. He was never involved. He was just running his mouth for clout. Now, here's the twist that is not getting enough attention. Quell is back. Quell is speaking again. And Quell is now saying that detectives have been reaching out to him. Not for a one-time interview. Not for a formality. He was reportedly scheduled for another sit-down with investigators this very week. And Quell is going even further. Quell is publicly stating that, in his opinion, Kashawn Rock may be facing arrest in the near future because detectives, according to him, are directing the majority of their questions toward her relationships, her affiliations, and the people who surrounded Ronnie Do in the days leading up to the ambush. Now, take that with whatever grain of salt you need to take it with. Quell is not a neutral source. Quell has his own reasons to point fingers. But the fact that he is being brought back into a room more than a year later tells you something. It tells you that the investigation has evolved. It tells you that the working theory of the case has sharpened. And it tells you that the people who thought this case had gone quiet were wrong. I want to pause here and thank the community of independent journalists who have refused to let this story die. Shout out to TMZ for getting the official confirmation from the department. Shout out to the Bish Gossip, to My Mixtapes, to Dom is Live News, to No Jumper, to Mobish, and to every other outlet that has kept Ronnie Do's name in the conversation when the mainstream press could not be bothered. Because let us be honest, without that constant, relentless drumbeat of coverage, this case would still be sitting in a filing cabinet in Arlington collecting dust. It is the pressure from you, from the viewers, from the community, from the reposters, from the commenters, that has forced this case back into the daylight. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing. And that pressure is going to matter more in the coming weeks than it has mattered at any point in the last 17 months, because we are now inside the window where investigations either close or collapse. And public attention is one of the few things that keeps a case like this from collapsing. Now, back to Kashawn Rock and the story she is telling the world right now. Because when I say her stories do not match, I mean it in a very specific, very forensic way. In the immediate aftermath of Ronnie Do's passing, Kashawn Rock offered one version of events. A version in which she was, essentially, a bystander. A version in which she had no knowledge, no involvement, no awareness of anything that was being planned. And in the months that followed, that version has shifted. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would trigger an obvious headline, but in small, quiet, telling ways. The framing has changed. The emphasis has changed. The parts of the story she chooses to lean into have changed. And her core defense at this point seems to be that because she was not physically present at the scene, she cannot be held accountable for anything that happened there. But that is not how the law works. That is not how conspiracy works. That is not how solicitation works. That is not how any of this works. You do not have to pull the trigger to be responsible for the trigger being pulled. You do not have to be in the room to have set the room on fire. And detectives, who deal with cases like this every single day, understand that distinction better than anyone. If the people who carried out this ambush were connected, in any way, to Kashawn Rock or to anyone in her orbit, then the legal exposure does not stop at the shooters. It extends outward. It extends upward. It extends to whoever made the phone call, whoever provided the location, whoever paid the bill, whoever whispered the word that turned a Tuesday into a funeral. And this is why the boxing match matters. This is why the traffic court matters. This is why the country-fleeing statement matters. This is why the 30-day live stream blackout matters. Every single one of these behaviors is consistent with a person who is preparing, in some way, for a disruption to her normal life. You do not walk away from a paid boxing match at the 11th hour because you are feeling introspective. You do not casually mention leaving the country when you have a young child and an entire brand rooted in an American audience. You do not stop broadcasting to a fan base that is your entire source of income because a piece of equipment is on the fritz. These are the choices of someone who is bracing. Bracing for what? We do not yet know. But the pattern is unmistakable. And the pattern, when you zoom out, is louder than any single statement Kashawn Rock has made in defense of herself. Let me hit you with a mid-video reminder, because I need you locked in for the rest of this. If this video is giving you what no other channel is giving you, hit that like button right now, Drop a comment below telling me whether you believe Kashawn Rock's camera story, and share this video with somebody who has been asking about the Ronnie Do case. The more eyes on the story, the more pressure stays on the case, and the more likely it is that Ronnie Do's family finally gets the answers they have been waiting 17 months for. Now let us talk about Kashawn Jr., because this is the part of the story that breaks my heart every single time I sit down to cover it. Kashawn Jr. is a child. Kashawn Jr. did not ask to be born into the middle of this. Kashawn Jr. has already lost, potentially, the man who is fighting through a courtroom to be present in his life. And Kashawn Jr. is now living inside a household that, by every available public indication, is destabilizing in real time. And here is a detail that most people covering this story have not stopped to think about. If Kashawn Rock does, in fact, attempt to leave the country, she cannot simply bring Kashawn Jr. along like a piece of luggage. International travel with a minor requires documentation. It requires medical records. It requires vaccinations that are logged and verified. It requires proof of guardianship in a form that customs officials can accept. And based on what is publicly known and has been discussed by Kashawn Rock herself, Kashawn Jr. does not have the medical credentials in place to board an international flight, clear customs, and be admitted into another country. Which means, if the plan is what a lot of people suspect the plan is, Kashawn Rock would have to leave Kashawn Jr. behind. Or move him under conditions that would create their own legal problems. Neither of those is a plan. Neither of those is a strategy. Both of those are the desperate calculations of someone whose options are narrowing by the day. And the narrowing of options, historically, is exactly the moment where people in her position make the mistakes that hand prosecutors the last piece of the puzzle. And this is where we come back to the central question of this entire story, the question that has been sitting underneath every rumor, every live stream, every blog post, every timeline analysis for 17 months. Was Ronnie Do targeted because of the custody filing? Was the DNA test the trigger that turned a family court dispute into a homicide investigation? Was the ambush in front of that family member's home the direct result of Ronnie Do refusing to walk away, refusing to disappear, refusing to let his son grow up without him? Because if the answer to those questions is yes, then this is no longer just a criminal case. This is a case about what happens to fathers in this country who refuse to accept being erased. This is a case about how quickly a paternity filing can transform into a funeral. And this is a case that has implications far beyond Arlington, far beyond the immediate circle of people involved, and far beyond the audience that has been following this story from the beginning. Because if a man can be ambushed for filing paperwork in a family court, then every single father in a contested custody battle in America has a reason to pay attention to what happens next in the Ronnie Do case. Now, I want to be careful here, because everything I am telling you tonight is a combination of public reporting, public statements made by the parties themselves, and inferences drawn from publicly available timelines. Nothing has been proven in a court of law. Nobody has been formally charged in the killing of Ronnie Do. Kashawn Rock has not been arrested. Quell has not been arrested. The investigation is ongoing, and until a prosecutor brings charges and a judge accepts them, everyone involved is entitled to the presumption of innocence. But the presumption of innocence in a courtroom does not mean the presumption of silence in the public square. The public has a right to look at a timeline. The public has a right to ask questions about a pattern of behavior. The public has a right to notice when someone announces they are leaving the country and then announces they are going dark for 30 days and then announces that their camera is broken while still filming with it. The public has a right to notice these things and to talk about them openly, because if the public does not talk about them, nobody will. And the last 17 months have proven, again and again, that public conversation is the only thing that has kept this case from being buried alive. So let me lay out, one more time, exactly what we know as of this moment. We know that the Arlington Police Department has confirmed, through TMZ, that the investigation into Ronnie Do's killing has been active for 17 months, and that there have been recent developments. We know that Quell, who once claimed responsibility and then walked it back as trolling, has been called in for additional interviews with detectives, and that these interviews are ongoing as recently as this week. We know that Kashawn Rock has made a series of statements and behavioral shifts that, taken together, describe a pattern of retreat, avoidance, and preparation for some kind of exit from her current public life. We know that Ronnie Do had, in the weeks leading up to his passing, formally initiated legal action to establish paternity and custody of Kashawn Jr. We know that Ronnie Do was ambushed in front of a family member's home in a manner that required advanced knowledge of his location and habits. And we know that the majority of the independent media coverage of this case has coalesced around a single, unified narrative that pushes the case forward with urgency and refuses to allow it to fade back into the shadows. That is what we know. That is what the record shows. That is what the community has been shouting from the rooftops for a year and a half. And that is the foundation on which every prediction, every analysis, every next step in this case is going to be built. And here is what I believe. I believe the detectives are not as slow as some of the people at the center of this case seem to think they are. I believe that when investigators have been quietly working a case for 17 months, they do not need a public confession to close the loop. I believe that a case built on timeline, on financial records, on phone records, on witness testimony, and on the physical evidence collected at the scene does not require the cooperation of the people it is targeting. And I believe that Kashawn Rock's sudden desire to disappear is not a coincidence. I believe it is a response. A response to signals she is receiving from her legal team, from people in her circle, from the ambient temperature of the case as it heats up. And I believe that the 30-day livestream blackout is not a break. It is a countdown. It is somebody watching a clock nobody else in the audience can see, and calibrating her final public moves against a deadline that only her attorneys and the people around her fully understand. Let me tell you what I think happens next, because you came here for analysis, and I am going to give you the analysis. In the next 30 to 60 days, I believe we will see one of three outcomes. Outcome 1. An arrest. Not necessarily of Kashawn Rock, but of one or more of the individuals allegedly involved in carrying out the ambush. And that arrest will crack the case open, because the first person to talk to prosecutors is the person who walks with the lightest sentence. Outcome 2. A public statement from the district attorney's office announcing that the case has moved from the investigative phase to the pre-charging phase, which would signal, in coded prosecutorial language, that the walls really are closing in. Outcome 3. A dramatic escalation from Kashawn Rock herself. Either an attempted departure from the country, a legal filing of her own designed to preempt what she believes is coming, or a public shift in narrative in which she attempts to reposition herself as a witness rather than a subject of the investigation. Any of those three outcomes would represent a seismic shift in this case. And based on what we are seeing right now, I believe at least one of those three is going to happen before the end of the year. Now, I know some of you are going to write in the comments and say that I am jumping to conclusions, that I am reading too much into the camera story, that I am building a case out of vibes and timing. And I hear you. I understand the skepticism. But skepticism cuts both ways. It is also skepticism to look at a broken camera excuse from a woman who is still filming and to say, that does not add up. It is also skepticism to look at a boxing match cancellation and a country-fleeing statement and a live stream blackout and to say, these things are not unrelated. Skepticism is not just refusing to believe the internet. Skepticism is also refusing to believe an explanation that does not survive contact with basic logic. And nothing about Kashawn Rock's public behavior in the last few weeks survives contact with basic logic. If you can build a coherent, internally consistent story that explains all four of these behaviors as unrelated coincidences, I invite you to drop it in the comments right now, because I have looked at this from every angle and I cannot make that story hold. There is one more thing I want to address before we close this out, and it is a question that a lot of you have been sending in. What about Kashawn Jr.? What happens to him? What does his future look like in the middle of all of this? And the honest answer is that nobody knows yet. If Kashawn Rock is charged, custody would become an immediate legal issue. If she is not charged but attempts to leave the country, the medical documentation issue would create a legal barrier that she may not be able to overcome. If she stays and continues to fight the public narrative from a defensive posture, Kashawn Jr. grows up in the middle of the most public custody and paternity dispute in recent memory. There is no clean outcome here. There is no version of the story in which a child does not carry weight into adulthood that no child should ever have to carry. And that is the part of the story that should sit heaviest with all of us. Because whatever we believe about who did what, whatever we believe about who knew what, whatever we believe about who called who and when, at the end of all of it, there is a little boy who is going to grow up asking questions. And the only thing the adults in this story owe him is the truth. Not spin. Not silence. Not live stream blackouts. Not international departures. The truth. I want to walk you through one more layer of this before we get to the closing, because there is a specific dimension of Kashawn Rock's recent behavior that I do not think has been analyzed carefully enough by anybody covering this case. And it deserves a full breakdown. When somebody in Kashawn Rock's position announces a 30-day live stream blackout, there are really only 3 plausible categories of explanation. Category 1 is the innocent explanation. Something in her personal life, her mental health, her equipment, her family situation has changed in a way that requires her to step back from the public eye. That is possible. That happens to creators all the time. But if that were the case, the framing of the announcement would not be defensive. It would not be paired with a broken camera excuse that contradicts itself in the same breath. It would just be a statement. I need a break. I will be back. That is what innocent explanations look like. Category 2 is the strategic explanation. Something in her professional life, her legal situation, or her public relations posture requires her to stop broadcasting to avoid saying something on camera that could be used against her later. That is also possible. In fact, it is the explanation most lawyers would advise their clients to adopt if they were, hypothetically, staring down the barrel of an investigation. If your attorney tells you, do not go live, do not answer questions, do not comment, and, by the way, come up with a reason for the break that does not sound like you are hiding. A broken camera is exactly the kind of alibi that a stressed-out defendant might grab for. Category 3 is the exit explanation. Something in her plans requires her to be off camera because she is preparing to physically leave, to relocate, to travel, or to disappear in some other way, and she does not want a live feed documenting that transition. All 3 of those categories share a common feature. None of them are neutral. All of them describe a woman whose current public posture is a response to pressure, not a choice made from a position of calm. And that pressure, wherever it is coming from, is the story. That pressure is the fingerprint on the wall. And then there is the question of what the detectives are hearing from the people around Kashawn Rock. Because in cases like this, the primary subject of an investigation is almost never the first person to crack. The first person to crack is somebody adjacent. A friend. A relative. A former associate. A driver. A neighbor. Somebody who was in the room when a phone call was made or overheard a conversation that they were never supposed to hear. That is the person prosecutors build their case around, because that is the person who has the least to lose by telling the truth and the most to gain by cooperating early. And in a case that has been open for 17 months, with the resources of a real police department behind it, the odds that no such person has come forward, or been identified, or been leveraged into a conversation, are vanishingly small. Somewhere in the orbit of this case, there is a person whose name we do not know yet, whose face we have never seen, who is going to become the pivot point of everything that happens next. And when that name surfaces, everything you thought you understood about the Ronnie Do case is going to reorganize itself around that new center of gravity. That is how investigations work. That is how cases close. And that is what I believe is happening in real time right now in Arlington. I want to zoom out for a moment and put this case in a broader context, because the Ronnie Do story is not happening in a vacuum. Cases like this, cases where a young man loses his life in a targeted ambush that appears to be connected to a family court dispute, get lost every single day in this country. They get filed away. They get downgraded. They get forgotten. And the only reason the Ronnie Do case has not been forgotten is because the people who loved him refused to let it be forgotten, and the community around them refused to let it be forgotten, and the independent media ecosystem refused to let it be forgotten. That refusal is a form of justice in itself. That refusal is a form of power. And that refusal is exactly what has forced the Arlington Police Department to keep this case open, keep this case staffed, and keep this case moving toward the outcome that the family has been demanding since day one. Never let anybody tell you that public attention does not matter. Never let anybody tell you that the algorithm cannot be used for good. Never let anybody tell you that a comment section is just noise. Because in the Ronnie Do case, every single piece of that public attention has been a brick in the wall that is now, at long last, closing in around the people responsible. I also want to speak, for a moment, directly to the family of Ronnie Do. If any member of that family is watching this video tonight, please know that this community sees you. This community has not forgotten. This community will not forget. 17 months is not the end of your fight. 17 months is the beginning of the phase of your fight where the pressure finally starts to pay off. And every single independent journalist, every single commentator, every single viewer who has typed the words "Justice for Ronnie Do" into a comment section over the past year and a half is standing with you in this moment. You are not alone in this. You have never been alone in this. And the outcome you have been praying for is closer today than it has ever been. If any of you need anything from this community, from this platform, from this audience, all you have to do is ask. This community will show up. This community has already shown up. And this community is not going anywhere until Ronnie Do gets the justice he deserves and Kashawn Jr. gets the truth about what happened to his father. There is also a conversation that needs to be had about what all of this means for how these cases are covered going forward. For too long, homicide cases involving young black men have been treated as second-tier stories by mainstream outlets. Not urgent. Not important. Not worth the front page. And the Ronnie Do case is proof, live proof, in real time, that when independent creators, community journalists, and everyday viewers refuse to accept that hierarchy of coverage, the story finds its way to the top anyway. The story finds its way to TMZ. The story finds its way onto the desks of detectives. The story finds its way into the conversation whether the mainstream press wants it there or not. That is a new model of accountability journalism. That is a new model of pressure. And the Ronnie Do case is going to be studied, years from now, as one of the clearest examples of that model working exactly the way it is supposed to work. Justice for Ronnie Do is not a hashtag. Justice for Ronnie Do is a demand. It is a demand for a family that has waited too long. It is a demand for a community that has organized, mobilized, and refused to be quiet. It is a demand for a criminal justice system that has, at least on paper, remained engaged with this case for 17 consecutive months. And it is a demand that, based on everything we are seeing this week, appears to finally, mercifully, be on the verge of being answered. Not with a headline. Not with a hashtag. But with a knock on a door, with a phone call, with a set of charges filed in a courtroom, with a name on an indictment, with a moment, at long last, of accountability. And when that moment comes, and I do believe it is coming, this channel will be there to cover every second of it in real time, with the same care, the same rigor, and the same refusal to let the noise drown out the signal that we have brought to this story from day one. Before you go, I need you to do 3 things. First, hit that like button, because it tells the algorithm to push this story out to more people who need to hear it. Second, subscribe to this channel if you have not already, because I am going to be covering every single update on this case as it develops, and you do not want to miss the moment when the news breaks. Third, drop a comment below and tell me exactly what you think. Do you believe Kashawn Rock's camera story? Do you think Quell knows more than he is saying? Do you think the detectives are days, weeks, or months away from an arrest? I read every single comment, and the conversation you all have in that comment section is one of the most valuable parts of covering this story. So do not hold back. Tell me what you see. Tell me what you feel. Tell me what you know. And finally, keep the Do family in your prayers tonight. Keep Kashawn Jr. in your prayers tonight. Keep the detectives working this case in your prayers tonight, because they are carrying a weight that most of us will never fully understand. And keep Ronnie Do's name on your lips, in your posts, in your comments, in your conversations. Because as long as we are still saying his name, this case is still moving. As long as we are still saying his name, justice is still coming. And I truly, deeply, urgently believe, based on everything we have covered tonight, that justice is closer today than it has ever been. I love you all. I will see you in the next video. Justice for Ronnie Do. Justice for Kashawn Jr. Prayers up for the Do family. And to whoever is watching this video from a place of guilt tonight, from a place of fear tonight, from a place of knowing exactly what you did and exactly what is coming, let me leave you with one last thought. 17 months is a long time, but it is not forever. And forever is exactly how long the truth is going to outlast you. The clock is ticking. The door is closing. And the moment of accountability at long last is almost here. Good night.